I never thought a quiet Tuesday night in the bookstore would feel like the kind of evening you replay in your head for weeks. The smell of old paper and the faint hum of the heater made everything feel softer, like time had decided to pause for a moment. I was stacking returned novels behind the counter when she appeared, Leah, my girlfriend's best friend. She didn't just enter a room. She owned the space without asking permission. That was her, always a little untouchable, always confident in a way that made me fumble over my own words. I'd seen her before, at parties, dinners, the occasional awkward hangout. But tonight there was something different. Something unspoken. She moved past the self-assured laughs and perfect smiles I knew from social media and my girlfriend's stories. Tonight, she was quieter, more deliberate. She picked up a paperback of Murakami's Kafka on the Shore, flipping it open as if she were reading me more than the pages. I tried to focus on the stack of books in front of me, pretending not to notice the way she lingered nearby. My fingers kept brushing against the worn edges of the covers, nervous energy hiding behind routine movements. She glanced up, meeting my gaze for a heartbeat too long, and I swear the air between us thickened, heavier than the dusty lights streaming through the tall windows. "You always work late?" she asked, leaning against the counter, arms crossed loosely. Her voice had that smooth, knowing quality, like she understood everything you didn't even know about yourself. Yeah? Quiet night," I muttered, shoving a stack of paperbacks into a tote bag. My words felt small, like trying to trap sunlight in a jar. She smiled, just a flicker, and there it was again, the flicker that made my chest tighten. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She tilted her head slightly, studying me, and I realized she wasn't just looking at me. She was seeing me. All of me. The awkward pauses, the too long stares at the shelves, the clumsy attempts to act casual. It was unnerving and magnetic all at once. Then she did something I'll never forget. She picked up a pen from the counter, tracing a line on the paper bag in front of me without really touching it, just a ghost of a gesture, like she was marking a boundary but inviting me in at the same time. "Be honest with me," she said, voice low, soft, almost a challenge, almost a plea. I blinked, startled. Honest? With her? My mind raced, tripping over thoughts I hadn't allowed myself to entertain. She was my girlfriend's best friend, someone I was supposed to see in a casual, friendly way, and yet here she was, leaning a little closer than social etiquette allowed, asking me to speak truths I hadn't even admitted to myself. Her eyes lingered on mine, not expectant, not demanding, just open, vulnerable, even, in a way that made me want to reach across the counter and tell her everything and nothing all at once. But I stayed silent, fumbling with the pen she had just set down, and she smiled again, that subtle curve of lips that made it impossible to look away. The clock ticked somewhere behind the stacks of novels. The heater hummed quietly, and I realized I had stopped breathing for a moment. And just like that, the space between us was full. Too full to ignore, too electric to touch. I can still feel it. The warmth of her presence beside me, the challenge in her voice, and that impossible, silent question hovering between us. And for the life of me, I haven't stopped thinking about that moment since. The next time I saw her, it was in the quiet hum of the hotel conference room where my part-time internship had me sorting supplies for a small corporate event. She had volunteered to help set up. My girlfriend had gone home early, and Leah insisted on staying, folding tablecloths and stacking chairs with an almost careful precision. I watched her from across the room, pretending to arrange the water pitchers while my eyes betrayed me. She moved deliberately, not in a rush, like she was careful about how much of herself she revealed to the world. I noticed how her hands brushed against the fabric, nails slightly chipped, as if she hadn't bothered to hide the small imperfections. There was a faint weariness in her shoulders, a subtle slump that vanished when anyone else looked her way, but I saw it. "Could you give me a hand with this?" she asked, voice even but not entirely steady. I moved closer, and the air between us shrank, charged without either of us touching. She didn't smile, not yet, but there was a quiet edge to her posture, like she was testing something. I handed her a stack of folders, and our fingers brushed for a split second. The contact was meaningless, and yet it made me catch my breath. She didn't talk much, but her silence said more than words could. I caught her glancing at me, then quickly away, like she was measuring what was safe to reveal. I noticed the way her eyes lingered on small details, the clock, the papers, a flicker of worry she didn't bother to hide. And then she exhaled sharply through her nose, almost inaudible, and I realized she was tired, not just physically, but in a way that ran deeper. "You seem really busy," I said, trying to sound casual, fumbling slightly as I adjusted the pile of chairs between us. She paused, hands hovering over a tablecloth, not meeting my eyes. "I'm used to it," she murmured finally. There was a faint weight to the words, something unspoken beneath them, like a confession she hadn't meant to offer me. I wanted to ask more, but the room felt smaller all of a sudden, crowded with things left unsaid. I watched her laugh quietly at a small joke I made about the folding chairs, soft and deliberate, not the full, easy laugh she showed to the world. And for a moment, she let herself be a little fragile, a little human, and it shook something inside me. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't untouchable. She was real, and somehow that made her more impossible to look away from. When we finished arranging the last row of chairs, she paused, leaning lightly against the table. I stood across from her, aware of the space, the silence, the small rhythm of our breaths. Then she did something that made my chest tighten. She tilted her head, just slightly, and looked at me, not at my face, not exactly at my eyes, but somewhere in between, and said quietly, "I trust you." It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a word, soft, careful, and loaded in a way that made the world around us fade. I wanted to answer, wanted to say anything, but I didn't. I just held the moment and let it linger. And even now, I can't stop replaying the quiet tilt of her head, the faint exhaustion in her shoulders, the way her presence pulled at something inside me that I didn't fully understand yet. It was past 9 when we found ourselves alone in the hotel's tiny break room. The storm outside had thickened, rain hammering the windows in relentless sheets. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering occasionally, casting uneven shadows across her face. She was sitting on the edge of a chair, knees drawn slightly together, and I was across from her, holding a mug of lukewarm coffee I hadn't drunk. We'd been arranging some last-minute details for tomorrow's conference, but the room had emptied, everyone else gone, chasing dry streets and dry clothes. There was a pause, long enough that the quiet became a thing pressing against my chest. She rubbed her hands together, and I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers, a subtle vulnerability she tried to hide behind a carefully neutral expression. "You ever regret things you shouldn't?" she asked, voice almost drowned by the rain. I blinked, unsure if she was talking to me or just speaking into the shadows. I didn't answer right away. She tilted her head toward me, eyes locking on mine with that strange, assessing calm she always carried. I felt my heartbeat speed, like it knew something my brain was trying to ignore. "I mean decisions," she continued, lips pressed together as if tasting her words first. "The ones you can't take back." I swallowed, aware that my mug had gone cold, aware of the tiny space between us that seemed both impossibly close and socially forbidden. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice stuck, thick and awkward. I just nodded instead, a poor substitute for the torrent of thoughts I couldn't articulate. She laughed softly then, a little bitter, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You can be honest with me, you know." Her words hovered in the humid air, weighty. I shifted, careful not to move too close, careful not to show the pull I felt toward her. Every instinct screamed at me to reach out, to bridge the inches that were both nothing and everything. But I stayed seated, fingers tightening around the mug, pretending it anchored me when really it was the only restraint I had. The storm cracked sharply outside, thunder rattling the window panes, and her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced down, a subtle stiffening in her shoulders, and I saw the edge of tension return, the reminder that the world existed outside this suspended bubble. Whoever was calling, she ignored it. I didn't ask, though a part of me wanted to. For a moment, it felt like the rain, the hum of the fluorescent light, and the fragile closeness were conspiring to make the world shrink until it was just the two of us. My mind raced. A collision of desire and restraint, of admiration and guilt. I leaned ever so slightly forward, enough that I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something warm, slightly floral, grounding and unsettling all at once. She looked at me then, eyes soft, lips parted slightly, like she had a secret she was only daring me to know. I could feel it, the quiet charge in the space between us, the almost thought of leaning closer, of letting my hand brush against hers. But before anything happened, her phone buzzed again, breaking the spell. She straightened, masking the flicker of hesitation with a polite sigh, and the moment dissolved. I stayed there a heartbeat longer, wanting and not wanting to speak, wanting and not wanting to move. And as I watched her gather her things, I realized that the spark hadn't gone away. It had only sharpened, leaving a question I couldn't stop turning over in my head. What if next time we didn't pull away? The office was empty except for the hum of the overhead lights and the faint tapping of rain against the window. I hadn't expected her to come in tonight, but there she was, standing by the copy machine, jacket draped over her arm, eyes scanning the papers in her hand. She didn't look at me at first, just moved through the motions, quiet, precise, as though nothing unusual had happened between us these past weeks. I cleared my throat. Hey. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. She glanced up, and for the first time tonight, our eyes met and held, unbroken. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, and I realized neither of us had to speak to know the tension had grown too big to ignore. I don't understand, I said finally, stepping closer but not too close. My fingers twitched, uselessly gripping the edge of the desk. What are we doing? She froze, pencil hovering over a notepad. Then she let it drop, slowly, deliberately, like a small surrender. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, the confident veneer I had always admired cracked. I don't either, she admitted, voice low, almost a whisper. It was strange, hearing uncertainty from her, the woman who always seemed to have everything measured, everything controlled. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to close the space that felt impossible between us. But I stayed still, aware of the quiet gravity pressing down, aware that this wasn't about desire. It was about the things neither of us had said, about the small truths buried under politeness and routine. She shifted slightly, and I noticed the fatigue in her eyes, the faint crease at the corner that made her look younger and older all at once. I can't pretend anymore, she said. Her voice trembled just enough that it made my chest tighten. We can't keep acting like this isn't different. Different. The word hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to argue, to rationalize, to laugh it off, but none of that would have mattered. She was right. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal, and pretending it was had become unbearable. I swallowed, feeling the raw ache of knowing she saw me differently, the same way I saw her. I don't know how to fix it, I said, my voice catching. Not with her, not with anyone. Just fix it. She looked down, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and when her eyes met mine again, they were vulnerable, exposed. Maybe it's not about fixing, she said softly. Maybe it's about admitting it, whatever it is. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I understood, not fully. All I knew was that the distance between us had collapsed into something heavier, denser, and every unspoken word felt louder than the ones we had finally allowed ourselves to speak. Then she turned, gathering her papers with that slow, deliberate grace, and as she walked toward the door, she paused. Not looking back, not saying goodbye, just whispered, almost to herself, I can't stop thinking about you. And just like that, the room felt emptier, colder, and impossibly closer at the same time. I didn't expect to find her in the back alley behind the bookstore, crouched near the dumpster, flipping through a stack of old papers as if she were looking for treasure. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, soaking the hem of my jacket, but she didn't seem to notice. Her hair stuck damply to her forehead, and her hands trembled slightly as she sifted through the crumpled sheets. Hey, I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, eyes wide, caught off guard, and then quickly tried to compose herself. Didn't mean to interrupt. She shook her head, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. No, it's fine, she murmured. But her voice had that edge of fragility I'd only glimpsed once before, the night she'd admitted she trusted me. Finally, she held up a single yellowed envelope, trembling just enough that I noticed it immediately. It's from him, she whispered. Her hands closed around it, knuckles white. I never sent it. Never, even mailed it. I stepped closer, hesitant. Who? Her eyes met mine, vulnerable and raw. Someone I loved, a long time ago. Someone I lost before I even realized how much he mattered. Her voice broke slightly, and for a moment, she just let the words hang in the damp alley between us. I didn't know what to say. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, flipping to an old photo she'd once mentioned, of her at a cafe, smiling shyly, holding hands with someone I never knew. You looked happy, I said, careful, not wanting to pry too aggressively. She swallowed, a small laugh escaping that was more brittle than amused. I thought I was. For a while. Then it all went wrong. I never really got over it. She tucked the envelope close to her chest, like it was a lifeline she didn't want to lose. I felt a strange ache watching her, her strength, her confidence, the way she carried herself every other day, fractured in that small, human confession. She wasn't invincible. She wasn't untouchable. She was painfully, achingly real. For a while, we didn't speak. I watched her fingers trace the edges of the envelope, small gestures loaded with memory, regret, and longing. I wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, but I didn't. My own emotions tangled in the quiet drizzle, in the way her shoulders slumped, in the tiny tremor in her hands. Finally, she looked up, eyes meeting mine again. I didn't mean for you to see this, she said, voice low, almost apologetic. It's messy, and maybe I'm messy too. I shook my head, unable to speak. The alley felt smaller, tighter, as if our proximity had compressed time itself. And then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned just a fraction closer, enough that I noticed the scent of rain and coffee and something uniquely her. She hesitated, voice faltering. I don't know what I want anymore. I wanted to answer, to tell her that I understood in ways I barely comprehended myself, but I stayed silent, letting the moment breathe. Because this raw, quiet exposure was louder than any words I could offer. And as she folded the envelope carefully into her coat pocket, a shiver passed through me, not from the cold, but from the seismic weight of seeing her like this, fractured, human, and terrifyingly close. The bookstore was closing, lights dimmed, the scent of old paper and ink wrapping around us like a quiet memory. I was stacking the last few returns when she appeared at the threshold, coat damp from the drizzle outside. She didn't say hello, didn't need to. Her presence alone made the space feel different, smaller, warmer. Forgot my notebook, she murmured, stepping inside. She hung her coat and moved to the counter, brushing the rain from her sleeves. I watched her, memorizing the small gestures, the tilt of her head, the way her eyes flicked over the stacks, the faint tension in her shoulders that I had come to recognize. We worked side by side in silence, sorting books, aligning shelves, the kind of quiet that wasn't awkward but charged, threaded with all the words we hadn't said. I stole glances at her whenever I could, noticing the way her fingers traced the spines of the books, lingering on the covers, as if seeking reassurance in the familiar. She looked up at me once, and I caught the flicker of something. Trust, recognition, an unspoken question. I didn't answer with words. I just nodded slightly, the smallest acknowledgement that I understood, that I saw her. The storm outside had softened, leaving a faint drizzle against the windows, and I realized that the world beyond the bookstore had shrunk to the space between us. No explanations, no declarations, just the quiet intimacy of shared effort. I wanted to reach for her hand, to close the inches that had always felt like both too much and never enough. She brushed a strand of damp hair from her face, and I noticed her fingertips tremble ever so slightly. Without thinking, I reached out, letting my hand hover near hers. She didn't pull back. She didn't move forward. She just let it linger, a promise of connection in the absence of words. For a long moment, we stood like that, hands almost touching, eyes meeting in soft acknowledgement of everything that had happened, everything we had both tried to hide. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't cinematic. It was real, quiet, fragile, and entirely inevitable. Finally, she leaned just a little, resting her forehead lightly against my shoulder. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't break the moment. The simplicity of it, the shared breath, the warmth, the quiet understanding, felt like the only way forward that made sense. We stayed like that until the last lights flickered, until the bookstore hummed with the finality of closing. She pulled back slightly, just enough to look at me, her eyes soft, her lips curved in that subtle, knowing way that had always disarmed me. "No need to say anything," she whispered. I nodded. I didn't need to. The space between us had already spoken everything. And as she gathered her things and stepped toward the door, hand brushing mine ever so lightly, I realized that some connections didn't need words. They were understood in the pauses, in the shared silences, in the small, deliberate moments that made the world shrink to just the two of us. I watched her leave, the drizzle catching in her hair, and for the first time, I felt the quiet finality of something we had both earned, tender, patient, inevitable, and entirely ours. Looking back now, I can see how slowly everything shifted. The way quiet moments carried more weight than grand gestures. The way words left unsaid were sometimes louder than those we spoke aloud. I still remember the bookstore, the drizzle, her forehead leaning against my shoulder, and how in that small, unremarkable space, the world felt suspended and nothing else mattered. It's strange to think how much we learned about each other without ever really trying. She taught me patience, the kind that comes from understanding that people aren't puzzles to solve, but lives to witness. She showed me that strength and vulnerability can coexist, that laughter can hide pain and silence can reveal it. And in letting her see me, flaws and all, I learned how to trust, not just others, but myself, my own instincts, my own heart. For her, I think it was the same. I saw her soften in ways she rarely let anyone witness. The careful armor she wore didn't disappear, but I watched her carry it differently, less out of fear, more out of choice. She let herself feel, let herself linger in moments, let herself acknowledge what mattered and what couldn't be ignored. And in doing so, she became even more remarkable, even more impossibly human. Love, I've come to realize, doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers, lingers in a glance, a brush of fingers, a shared breath. It isn't always about declarations or dramatic turns. It's about quiet understanding, the way two people can meet in a room full of noise and still hear each other perfectly. That's what we had. Not perfection, not certainty, just an honesty that carried us forward, gently, inevitably. I think the hardest lesson, and the most beautiful, was learning that some connections aren't about claiming, controlling, or demanding. They're about presence, patience, and recognition. They're about choosing to exist in someone else's world without breaking it or yourself. And maybe that's the kind of love that lasts, not because it shouts, but because it quietly holds everything that needs holding. Sometimes, I still feel her presence in small ways. The tilt of a head, the subtle tremor of a hand, the scent of rain in a bookstore aisle. It isn't aching or longing. It's remembrance, gratitude, and the quiet joy of having experienced something rare and unspoken. And when I think of that night, that small, impossible closeness, I smile, not with relief, but with recognition. We both grew, we both learned, and in that subtle, patient way, we found something neither of us knew we were searching for. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?